وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن سيدنا ونبينا محمدا عبده ورسوله أما بعد. So this is the third installment in our series on abuse in the Muslim community. And last time we said that we wanted to look at the link between community abuse and mental health from two perspectives. So number one was mental health as a driver or root cause of abuse. And the second angle or second perspective was the effects of abuse on the mental health of the abused. So we spent the majority of our last roundtable talking about mental health as the root cause of abuse. And today we will look at the effects of abuse on the mental health of the victims of abuse, as well as some coping mechanisms and solutions. But before we continue, let's just remind ourselves why we are having this discussion. So one of the reasons is because understanding is a coping mechanism. We tend to handle things better, particularly bad things. We tend to handle bad things better when we know why they happen and what has motivated them. Number two, understanding is the first step toward meaningful solutions. We can't solve the problems we face without identifying the root cause. And number three, understanding encourages being part of the solution instead of part of the problem. An explanation: if we understand that our own undiagnosed or insufficiently addressed personality disorders are creating abusive situations, we are more likely to be moved to appropriately address them. And so what we need to understand when we talk about abuse in the Muslim community is that people are not evenly divided between victims and victimizers. But there are actually some people in the Muslim community who play both roles. That they are sometimes victims, but they are also victimizers. Sometimes they are the abused, and sometimes they themselves are abusers. And so if we understand the connection between mental health and the link between mental health and the abuse that we're seeing in the Muslim community, then we can begin to look at ourselves and see how sometimes we are ourselves victimizing others and we are abusing others, albeit inadvertently or unwittingly. طيب. So let me begin by saying this. If many of us or most of us honestly ask ourselves the question, am I okay? Am I in a good place? Spiritually, mentally, emotionally? Is my relationship with my Muslim community a healthy one, a spiritually, emotionally, and mentally gratifying one, or a toxic one? I think the answer to these questions would be in the negative. I think many of us, and by us, I mean reverts or convert Muslims. And that doesn't mean to say that these things are not applicable to people who are born Muslims, heritage Muslims. But particularly us, and what I mean is reverts or converts, we are generally detached from our communities. Even if we are there physically, we are not there emotionally. Our hearts are not truly in the community, and we don't have the level of community spirit that our religion encourages us to have. Many of us, and again by us I mean reverts or convert Muslims, feel neglected, which is a form of passive aggressive abuse. When we're neglected, we're being abused. It's just a passive aggressive form of abuse. Many of us feel neglected. We don't feel that our myriad and often complex needs as reverts are acknowledged, let alone appropriately addressed. We complain a lot, and not because it is our nature to complain, but rather because there are legitimate issues that are troubling us and affecting our collective psyche. So, for example, among the issues that many revert or convert Muslims face, and they often complain when they get amongst themselves and they begin to air their grievances, they begin to kind of vent about what they're experiencing. Among the issues that you hear coming up a lot are issues of exclusion and exclusivity. They feel that they are not completely welcome. They're not completely invited or included in the Muslim community, and the Muslim community is exclusive. And that it is, they are a part of the community, but not a part of the community. And sometimes they don't feel that they are a part of the community or even invited to be a part of the community. Exclusion and exclusivity. Another one, a lack of recognition and acceptance. They just feel that they are overlooked, that they are not seen, that it's as if they're invisible. That's how they feel, a lack of recognition and acceptance. They don't feel that they are accepted and embraced by the immigrant Muslims who are the dominant members of the Muslim community. Another example of these issues is racial and ethnic prejudice. That many convert Muslims, particularly those who are the African descendants of slaves or the African descendants of formerly enslaved peoples, they will talk about feeling, and even this is true for Hispanics too, black and brown people will say that they feel that there is a certain level of racial and ethnic prejudice in the communities to which they belong or which they member. And particularly there are instances where they may not directly experience it from other adults, but their children experience it. Their children will try to play with the children of immigrants, and they won't be invited to play. They'll actually be called names and racial slurs, etc., and so on. Or things will be said which are expressions of certain negative stereotypes, and they'll be said as if they're just accepted truths. They're just absolute truths which cannot be argued or disputed or refuted. These are all examples of the racial and ethnic prejudice that is an issue in the Muslim community that affects, as we said, our collective. It troubles us, we complain about it, and affects our collective psyche. Another example, being viewed as less Muslim or less of a Muslim, being tokenized or not taken seriously. So basically, when you have the converts, in many cases, they are looked at by their immigrant peers as tokens of a sort, something that can be brought out and put on display to make themselves feel that they are actively doing something good by bringing people to Islam. And in many cases, the people who come to the mosque and convert are not coming as a consequence of the evangelical efforts of the people in the mosque. They themselves have either bumped into a Muslim or happened to work with a Muslim or met a Muslim by chance or go to school with a Muslim and asked questions and actively did their due diligence to find out about Islam. No one is going after them from the mosque and trying to call them to Islam, but they sure will take credit for that. And over time, those convert Muslims will, again, they won't feel that they're actually being accepted or included, but when it's convenient, it'll be said, look, look at what we're doing. Look at so-and-so who became a Muslim. Look at so-and-so. Look how good they're doing. Look, this non-Muslim became a Muslim. They'll say these things in a way of tokenizing, but not really taking them seriously as these are our brothers and sisters of faith. These are our peers in Islam. Another example is a lack of empathy or sympathy for our specific challenges. It's another thing that a challenge that we face or an issue that we face, and we complain about a lot, the fact that there's a lack of empathy or sympathy for our specific challenges. For example, one big challenge that we have when we convert to Islam is non-Muslim family members and how to deal with that dynamic, how to deal with having a mother and a father and sisters and brothers and aunts and uncles who are not Muslim, and how to explain that we're Muslim to them, and how to deal with their reaction, which in many cases could be very negative. It could be confrontational. It could be hostile. How do we deal with that? There's oftentimes a lack of sympathy. There are convert Muslims who went home to their mothers or fathers with whom they were living and told them they converted to Islam, and they were kicked out of their homes and forced to live in the street or sleep in a car. And when they came to the mosque and told the people in the mosque that was their situation, it was kind of like a shoulder shrugging moment, and man, that's too bad, and best of luck with that situation. No empathy, no sympathy, let alone empathy for people who have non-Muslim family members that they have to deal with. Non-Muslim family members who, when there's some type of event at the mosque, for example, let's say they're getting married and they want to invite their non-Muslim family, there's like this uncomfortable feeling, this awkwardness that, okay, are these immigrant Muslims, in many cases they're not, able to accept and embrace the fact that they have non-Muslim family members who want to be a part of this event. And they're going to come dressed a certain way, and they're going to come and maybe do certain things that are not approved, but they don't know any better. And so we have to be understanding and tolerant. So these are some of the things that we face. Another example is non-Muslim spouses. People convert to Islam and are married to a wife or married to a husband who's not Muslim. And how do they deal with that? Lack of sympathy or empathy for that. Non-Muslim children. You convert to Islam and you have kids who are grown for the most part, and they're living with you and they're non-Muslims and they're doing lots of non-Muslim, un-Islamic things. And you maybe want to bring them to the mosque so somebody can teach them about Islam and help you present Islam to them and invite them to Islam. And you just won't get the empathy or the sympathy or the support you need to make that happen. Also, one of the big ones is the new Muslim learning curve. There's a lot to learn when you first become a Muslim. Just the prayer itself is very challenging. Trying to recite the Quran and to say the different formulas and words and expressions that we have to say in different parts of the prayer, remembering the movements and putting them in the right order, etc. That there's a learning curve there. And there's a learning curve as it relates, and a lot of times we just don't get the empathy and sympathy from, it's like, figure it out. You should know this. You're Muslim. You have to, and people are kind of just pushing past us and expecting us to keep pace. A good example of this learning curve is the ignorance of prohibited things. That many of us convert to Islam and we come to the mosque and become part of the Muslim community. And our life before becoming Muslim was a life of doing a lot of things which Islam does not approve of. And we don't know that it's not approved of, and there's no way we can know until somebody teaches us. But in many cases, we are treated differently. We're looked down upon. We are denigrated as if you should just know better. So for example, people come to the mosque, new Muslims convert, and they have tattoos. They have tattoos and they are looked down upon. They are denigrated. They are disenfranchised because they have tattoos. They have girl or boyfriends. They listen to music. They're on their way to the mosque. They pull up in front of the mosque with their windows down and they're blasting, some rap music with vulgar lyrics. They don't know any better, but they're treated differently. We are treated differently and treated poorly because of ignorance, which is no fault of our own. We're ignorant because we're just converted to Islam, and there's a learning curve. And another good example of the legitimate issues that are troubling us and affecting our collective psyche and are not being responded to or addressed appropriately in many immigrant communities is the issue of marriage. That many brothers and sisters, they struggle to find spouses. And in many cases, in immigrant communities, they are not invited to be candidates for the daughters and sons of immigrants. And so it becomes very, very difficult and challenging for convert Muslims, revert Muslims to get married, particularly women, revert and convert women to get married. They struggle with this, and there's not enough. These issues are either not addressed or they are poorly addressed, and the solutions that are offered in often cases or oftentimes they create more problems. Instead of being a real solution, they create more problems than existed before the solution was offered. So these are just a few examples, brothers and sisters, of the issues that we face and are often neglected by the communities of which we are members. Now, what are the common effects of the active abuse and neglect that we experience? We talked ad nauseum in the last two segments or installments about what abuse in the Muslim community looks like. And we've also added some examples here, particularly the neglect of our specific needs and the failure to respond to those needs appropriately. So what is the common effects of the abuse? What's happening to us? What's happening to those of us who are experiencing this abuse? A few things are happening. One, anxiety disorders. Many of us are developing anxiety disorders, particularly social anxiety disorders, the inability to connect with people, particularly the inability to connect with other Muslims, particularly the inability to connect with born Muslims and immigrants, that we're unable to connect with them on any meaningful level. Yeah, we can see them in the mosque, meet them at the shoe rack in the entrance and give salams and then keep it moving. But to sit and have a conversation with them, to tell them about our family and they tell us about their family, and to develop a type of association that leads to a friendship, that doesn't happen a lot. That doesn't happen a lot. I'm not saying it doesn't happen, but it doesn't happen a lot. We don't feel comfortable. We develop this social anxiety. We're unable to connect with people. We don't feel comfortable in those settings, and we avoid those settings. And I think this is the reason why many of us, we seek out these virtual communities like Clubhouse. I've gotten on here in time. There's been times I've gotten on here and there have been maybe 60 people in the room. And I know that there are a lot of rooms that people visit, they attend regularly, and Clubhouse has become a big thing. And I think one of the reasons why that is the case, why we seek out these virtual communities like Clubhouse, I think is because we do have this anxiety disorder. We do have this, we suffer and struggle with being able to connect with people face to face, in person, in the traditional way that people connect with others. And we do feel abused, we do feel neglected, we do feel victimized, and we feel ashamed and afraid to acknowledge our feelings. Or we see no benefit in doing so. We feel like if we were honest with the people in our community, and some people have, they've been vulnerable, they put themselves out there, and they've told their imams, or they've told people in leadership, or just people in the community, hey, as a convert Muslim, I feel this way, I feel that way, and they've been actually laughed at, literally laughed at. They've been literally told that these things are insignificant. You're making a mountain out of a molehill. You don't understand your faith. You're not Muslim enough. You don't pray enough. You don't fast enough. Rather than acknowledging the true causes for these feelings and the existence of abuse in the Muslim community that leads us to feel the way we feel. So because of that, because of people feel ashamed or afraid to acknowledge their feelings, or they see no benefit in doing so, we'll just get laughed at, we'll just get made fun of and be told that we're not Muslim enough, that we don't understand Islam properly, that we're still bringing baggage from Dar al-Kufr or from Jahiliyyah. We're bringing that baggage in with us to Islam and thinking the wrong way, and that's why we're so focused on these things which real Muslims don't even suffer from or have problems with. So what's happening is that we want to be connected to other Muslims, but we want to be connected in a way that makes us feel safe from ridicule, safe from being shamed, safe from being made to feel less than. And so we seek out these virtual communities. And I think that's why a lot of us are here. So another of the common effects of this abuse and neglect is isolation. And this is another common thing that we see. We see people taking time off from the mosque and the community. And this is very common. People will say, you haven't seen them in a long time, and you might bump into them at Al-Jum'ah. You might bump into them at Salat al-Eid, the Eid prayer. And you'll say, hey, I haven't seen you in a long time. And they'll say something like, hey, I had to take a time out. I had to take time away from the mosque, right? I found the mosque or certain people in the mosque triggering. And so I had to step away. This is very common. And also maybe a little less common, but not necessarily so, is people becoming totally unmosqued, which means they don't associate or affiliate with a mosque at all. They don't associate with the Muslim community at all, except what? In very rare occasions, for specific events, for a specific amount of time that they can tolerate. And then they, as we say, they get on through. And so this is another one, isolation. Muslims are becoming isolated. Why? Because of the neglect and the abuse that they're experiencing. Another thing that's happening is depression. Muslims are suffering from depression, particularly converts and revert Muslims. They are depressed. And whether they acknowledge it or not, when you talk to them and you interact with them and they kind of like, they vent and open up about what they're experiencing and going through, everything points to them being depressed, in a state of depression. Another common effect, particularly for young people, and this is important for those of us who have we have young children who are right in that sweet spot between being full-grown adults and being adolescents. They're like in the teenage years, in the final years of their formative stages. The clay is about to go into the oven. Those young people, one of the common effects of this abuse is the development of personality disorders. And that means that our kids can be permanently affected by this abuse. And this is why it's critical for us to be aware of it and what's happening to our kids. I mean, a lot of us, I think we kind of sense and see something is off. That this child who loved to wear the hijab, loved to go to the mosque, right? Loved to pray, all of a sudden loves everything but those things and has to be forced to do those things or has to be bribed to do those things. We start to see we're losing our grip. They're drifting away. And we're looking for the reason and perhaps the root cause of it. The root cause of it is this abuse and this neglect that's affecting them. What they're experiencing when they're in the mosque environment, when they're in the community environment, that is ultimately leading them to respond this way. And they develop these personality disorders, whether it be social anxiety disorder, PTSD, and some of the other disorders that we mentioned or we referenced the last time. But another common effect is suicidal thoughts. People actually thinking and talking about taking their own lives. And I've talked to Muslims who have had those thoughts, and had those thoughts as a consequence of the abuse and neglect they've experienced in the Muslim community. Another one is low self-esteem, just believing that you're not good enough, believing that you will never be good enough, believing that the problem is you, etc. Another one is actual physical illnesses, that there are some people who physically become ill, and experts have said that mental illness and emotional abuse and neglect can have a physical impact which is on par with physical abuse. And among the examples that they give of some of the physical ailments that can come as a result of emotional abuse is difficulty concentrating, muscle tension, racing heartbeat, various aches and pains, insomnia, and so on and so forth. And some of us are experiencing these symptoms, and we don't necessarily realize that they are linked to some type of trauma, some type of emotional abuse, and particularly emotional abuse that we may be experiencing or being subjected to in the Muslim community. And I remember, just to give an example of my own experience, when I was in Vermont, it was a very toxic community with a lot of bad actors, a lot of people who did a lot of bad things, and they were actively abusive. They were actively abusive, and they were verbally abusive. Sometimes they were physically abusive. And this is not hyperbole. I'm talking about people who would come to the mosque and get into fist fights. People who come to the mosque and spit in other people's faces. I'm talking about people who come to the mosque and get into a shouting argument that involved curses and curse words and profanity, etc. I'm talking about people who would go to law enforcement and take out a restraining order or a trespass. I'm trying to remember what the wording is. Not restraining order, but it is
trespassing notice.
I'm trying to. What did you say, Zahida? What'd you call it?
Trespassing notice.
So basically, what it is I'm not sure if it's trespassing notice. That doesn't sound like the term that they use, but basically, what it is that basically you go to the law enforcement and you say that this person, you make a claim that a person is doing something that is threatening or violent or should be banned from this space for whatever reason. And the law will basically write up an order that person cannot come within 100 yards of the masjid. Restraining orders for your person. They can't come within 100 yards of you. But there's another order if it's the space, like the mosque itself. And I forget the name of it, but you guys get the point. It's basically people would go to the law enforcement and actually take these orders out. And people would come to the mosque only to find out that they were not allowed to come. And if they came, they could be arrested. This is the type of things that were going on when I was in that community in Vermont. And I was not exempt from some of these behaviors, from some of these bad actors. And it got so bad that it actually affected my physical health. And one day I was coming to the mosque to lead the Fajr prayer. And the closer I got to the door, the more it became hard for me to breathe. And I felt disoriented. And after the prayer, because of how I felt, I went home and I took a nap. I just thought maybe I needed to rest. And I remember we had a townhouse, so my bedroom was upstairs. I came down the steps after resting and I almost fell down the steps. And I called, there was a doctor and a nurse from the community, very nice, two nice brothers. I told them what was going on and how I was afraid. I never had experienced these symptoms before. And they both rushed over. They did a quick exam on me and took me to the hospital. And I guess what had happened was I had an anxiety attack or whatever it was. And the physician who attended to me in the emergency room said, look, I don't know what's going on in your life, but you need to rest. And whatever it is that you might think is affecting you, you need to stay away from that space and those people for a period of time to regain your health, etc. and so on. So I say this to say that yes, brothers and sisters, one of the common effects of this emotional abuse, and neglect is included in that, is physical illnesses, which could be as impactful on your health or your physical health as physical abuse itself. And so I say all that to say, brothers and sisters, that the reality is that when we are abused, there is no textbook way to respond or react, and no single way to feel about the abuse or neglect we are experiencing. Different people are going to respond in different ways. But our feelings, whatever those feelings are not wrong or something to be ashamed of. Okay, what the community should be ashamed of, what we as Muslims should be ashamed of, is that this exists in our community. That it exists in our community, that people can be so abused and so victimized in the Muslim community that they're feeling this way. Emotional abuse, brothers and sisters, is wrong. It is not normal, it's not to be expected, and it should not be normalized. However, the feelings we have toward being abused, whatever those feelings are absolutely normal. It's normal for people when they are mentally, emotionally, spiritually, psychologically, financially abused. It's normal for them to what? To react in a certain way, whether it's being depressed, whether it's running away and withdrawing, being isolated, whether it's being physically unhealthy. All of these responses are actually normal according to experts who have researched. This is how the body responds. This is how we try to protect ourselves from the trauma that we're experiencing. So let's talk now, brothers and sisters, about some solutions. We've talked extensively ad nauseum about what's happening to us, what we're experiencing, how it affects us, etc. Let's talk about some solutions. And one of the solutions, brothers and sisters, it's important for us to reach out for support and not to suffer in silence. I think a lot of us, that's what we do. We just go and we are having these feelings, we're experiencing this abuse, and we decide just going to deal with it, just going to grin and bear it, just going to bite down on my lower lip until it goes away. And many of us, we have good people in our lives which are a great support system. They can serve as people who can give us support, who can help us talk things through and cope through just that peer-to-peer support. And that includes our spouses. Some of us have very good husbands or wives, and we don't use them enough. We don't talk to them enough. And we as spouses who are seeing our wives or husbands experience this abuse, we have to be listening ears. We have to be supportive. We have to let them talk and vent. We can't shut them down and say, oh, quit complaining. Oh, it goes with the territory. It's just part of the Muslim community. Just deal with it. We shouldn't respond that way. We should be sensitive. We should be understanding. We should be sympathetic and empathetic, and we should support them. Sometimes you just need to talk, and we should be there to talk. Those of us who may not be married, we have friends, we have family, we have fellow Muslims who, for example, they're converts, and they can definitely empathize when we're experiencing. Whatever the case may be, we need to find that support and reach out to that support system and utilize it effectively. Associated with that as another solution is avoid isolation. It's just not healthy. Although that may be our initial knee-jerk reaction to what we're experiencing in our communities, is just to step away. Just to step away. Not to go for prayer, not to go for programming in classes, not to go for Jumu'ah, not to go for Eid, not to deal with the Muslims at all because of what? They're triggering and they're traumatizing and they're abusive, etc. But that's not a solution. Why? Because as the Prophet said, "Adh-dhib ya'kul qasiya." He said the wolf, meaning the devil, preys on the lone sheep. And so when we're by ourselves, when we're not with the Muslim community, we are putting ourselves at risk of being preyed on and targeted by the shaitan. And so that's not the solution. We have to avoid isolation. Another important solution is to get physically active and make health-minded choices, particularly with our diet. One of the ways that we tend to cope, one of the coping mechanisms that many of us use is what? Is not eating enough. We either we don't eat enough, or we eat too much, or we eat the wrong things, and we do that to cope. Like they talk about comfort foods, right? And so you have people who their health is adversely affected by what they're experiencing with abuse because of why? Because they just sit around and they eat and drink and consume things which are harmful to their health. And so it's very important for us not to let that happen, to be actively concerned, especially when we're feeling abuse or experiencing abuse, to be actively concerned with our health, to be active, to be, to engage in physical fitness, exercise, and make healthy-minded choices in terms of what we eat, what we consume, what we watch, etc. Another coping mechanism, brothers and sisters, is to seek professional help. And sometimes, brothers and sisters, the problem is too big for us to solve on our own. And so we have to seek professional help. As Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, فَاسْأَلُوا أَهْلَ الذِّكْرِ إِن كُنتُمْ لَا تَعْلَمُونَ. Ask the people of knowledge if you do not know. And so it's from our religion that there are experts in the field of mental health that can help us deal with these types of things. And if we're not able to cope with it on our own, using whatever means have been given to us through our religion and our faith, one of the things that we should do is ask the people of knowledge, ask these experts and consult with them. And the Prophet said in the hadith, he said, "Ya ibadallah, tadawu, فَإِنَّهُ مَا أَنزَلَ اللَّهُ مِنْ دَاءٍ إِلَّا أَنزَلَهُ دَوَاءً." He said, "O servants of Allah, seek the cure for your ailments. For Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has not created a disease except that He created its cure." Obviously, in addition to seeking professional help and seeking the cures, that Islam has given us certain spiritual cures and spiritual treatments, and that should be one of the primary things that we look to and turn to as a means to cope. Okay? Another thing that's very important for me to say here, and it's a conclusion that I have reached after thinking about this for a long time and experiencing abuse in many different communities that I was a part of, is that sometimes, brothers and sisters, we have to recognize that sometimes a toxic situation or a toxic relationship, in this case, a relationship with a particular community, is never going to become healthy. That relationship is not salvageable. And to continue after we've tried repeatedly, to continue to try to salvage it is doing the same thing while expecting a different result, which is known as insanity. And many of us, brothers and sisters, we're insane because we keep subjecting ourselves to the same abuse that's been occurring to us for 5 years or 7 years or 10 years or 15 years or 20 years in one spot. And so at some point we have to recognize that sometimes a toxic situation or relationship is never going to become healthy. It's not salvageable. And we may need to cut ties with certain individuals to safeguard our well-being. So there might be certain individuals in the community who we just can't interact with. We can't fool with them. And the reason why we can't do that is because interacting with them is harmful. They themselves are serial abusers. And also sometimes we may have to look for healthier community environments. That I'm telling you, we shouldn't just leave the Muslim community altogether, but maybe we have to leave one community and go to a community which, although it may not be entirely healthy, it's healthier than the one that we're currently involved in. The other thing that we have to start thinking about as convert and revert Muslims, and this is something which oftentimes it evokes the ire of immigrant Muslims, even some convert Muslims. This solution is that sometimes, brothers and sisters, we have to consider actually starting our own communities that are for reverts and by reverts, and are particularly therefore responsive to the needs, the myriad needs and the complex needs of reverts. Nobody can understand us better than we can understand ourselves, understand what we need better than we can understand our needs, and address those needs better than we can address those needs. And if we're going to spaces and we're members of communities where those needs are persistently and constantly ignored and dismissed, then at what point do we say, okay, the only way I'm going to get these needs addressed is if I and people like me address them. And so this is another thing that we have to consider as a solution to this problem of abuse and neglect in the Muslim community. And with that, brothers and sisters, we will bring I'll bring my remarks to a close, and I will offer you the opportunity to ask any questions or make any comments that you might like to add to the discussion. هذا وصلى الله وسلم وبارك على نبي محمد. Is there anybody who would like to contribute to the discussion or ask a question? Again, brothers and sisters, one of the main impetuses of these revert roundtables is for us to talk and to open up and to kind of conduct a type of peer-to-peer therapy. I think a lot of people are just, a lot of people may be just naturally shy, and I think some people are reluctant to talk because they just are accustomed to not being in safe spaces where they feel that they can talk without being judged, etc., and so on. And inshallah ta'ala, this is a non-judgment zone. This is a zone where we need to talk. There's some things we have on our chests that we want to get off our chests. And I just want to make sure you all feel safe and comfortable doing that. If you don't have anything to say, I mean, you don't have to force yourself to say something. But if you do have something to say, but you're hesitant to say it because you just feel like, I don't know, am I safe here? I just want to assure you that you are safe.
Inshallah. I did see a mic come off, Sister Soraya. Did you have anything you wanted to say?
Assalamu alaikum tullah.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullah. Yes.
Okay, I was making sure my phone, it's a new phone, so I wasn't sure how to work it. I was just going to add, yes, some of the points that you hit, alhamdulillah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows best. But I know as for me, I'm burnt out. I'm burnt out with the community. I'm burnt out with a whole lot of stuff. So that's just, like you say, sometimes you take a break, or you, need to go somewhere much healthier. And so that's the stage where I'm at. So, sometimes it's not so much, you gotta dig. For me, I'm digging more into myself, and sometimes you just get burnt out from, like you say, having to, looking for different results, and always, it always turn out to be the same. So, sometimes you got to step back and you got to see what path Allah is going to put you on, So I'm asking for Allah's guidance, and taking those measures, thus far. So yes, I can agree on a lot of points that you said. So alhamdulillah, Rabbil Alameen, Jazakallah khair.
Barakallahu fiki. I just want to say, as a follow-up to that I can respect, I can totally understand and empathize with that feeling of I just have to kind of fall back. I need, just for the sake of my sanity and my, mental and spiritual well-being, I feel like I just can't be around certain people right now. I get that. I can empathize with that. I just would encourage you to be very careful with that. And even though you may not be active in a particular community right now because you need to, like you said, step away, don't step away from the Muslims, especially those good sisters that who are very committed, who will provide you with that support system, which we said was the number one solution. You just have to have good people in your life who will constantly encourage you and lift you up when you're down, etc. So just make sure, because again, when we're isolated, that's when we're in danger. That's when we are basically prey and the most vulnerable to the shaitan. So just bear that in mind. But I do empathize, Sister Soror, and I'm very sorry to hear you say that. And a lot of people are saying that, whether it be in where we live or elsewhere throughout the country. I'm talking to a lot of people, and a lot of people are right where you are, and they feel the way you feel.
I remember one time, a long time ago, when I had a lot of more free time to be at the masjid doing things, to accumulate the deeds. I used to make this dua that goes something like, oh Allah, please don't ever make it hard for me to get my blessings, right?
Mm-hmm.
To the masjid and getting the blessings, from the masjid. And then I remember hearing one time, someone gave a talk and they was saying, when we making dua, asking Allah for patience, we may be asking Allah to give us things that will cause us to have patience. And it has become hard, to do things at the masjid, to accumulate good deeds because of, a lot of the things that transpire, whether it's between you and leadership or, you and other Muslims. And it's just sad, it's really sad and disheartening that you can't the house of Allah, in good faith, good intentions to do something for the sake of Allah without a barrier being there. A lot of times people like to use the term, it's the shaitan, but sometimes it don't be the shaitan. Mm-hmm. Sometimes it be the evil within others. Mm-hmm. Themselves that, people don't like to be accountable for,
Yeah.
And this makes it real hard and strenuous. And, like you say, you want to step back, but you don't want to stop coming because of the good rapport that you have with other Muslims. And you see a lot of opportunity in the community, but it's almost like you're just stagnated because it's almost like you can't move forward.
Yeah.
It's like you keep taking a step backwards, So.
Yeah. I really appreciate you adding that, Zahida, because you articulated very well what a lot of people feel. And they feel torn between really wanting to come and be active and do the things that will draw us closer to Allah, and having to, in order to do that, subjecting yourself to abuse that puts you in a bad headspace, etc. And so it's a tough situation to be in. That's one of the reasons why I said that we have to start considering the option of creating our own spaces that are made by us, for us, and that cater to us, etc. And that doesn't mean that others are not welcome. But if we, it's just like, for example, an analogy is, if you go back 100 or so years, there was something called Jim Crow in the South. Segregation, where African Americans could not go to the same schools as whites. They couldn't sleep in the same hotels as whites. They couldn't be served in the same restaurants as whites. They couldn't be treated in the same hospitals and clinics as whites. And they had no option. If they really wanted to have these services provided for them, they had to create these spaces for themselves. And unfortunately, we're experiencing a type of Jim Crow right now, a type of Jim Crow in the Muslim communities. And that might sound like hyperbole, and you're exaggerating, and it's not that bad. Okay, fair enough, but it's pretty bad. And many of us feel that our needs, just like the needs of African Americans back then, were not being catered to and not addressed, and they had to do it themselves. Many of us feel forced and compelled to do that. And I don't think there's any shame in that. Talking about it, considering it, seeing how viable it is. Because if we don't do that, many of us, and we've seen this, many of us are going to end up, after first leaving the Muslim community altogether, and some people will actually leave Islam. And it's happened. It has happened, and it will continue to happen if we don't do something to address these issues. Barakallahu feekum. Alhamdulillah. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reward all of you for coming. And we thank you for taking time out of your Tuesday evening to be with us and to hear these words. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make these words beneficial for all of us in this world and beneficial to us when we meet Him subhanahu wa ta'ala. Ameen ya Rabbil Alameen. And with that, we'll bring today's session to a close. Hada wa sallallahu wa sallam wa barak ala Nabi Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.